when we look at our screen and see 3D objects, what we really see are meshes composed of geometries and materials. Before diving into what they are, let's see how to declare them using Three.js with React Refiber. Download the starter pack from the lesson, extract it, and run yarn to install the dependencies. Then you can run yarn dev to start the development server. If you click on the link, you can see this box. It's not important for now. Let's see how to create a simple mesh, a box using Three.js. First, we will need a geometry. We define it this way, new 3.box geometry. And as the parameter, the constructor parameters are the width, the height, and the depth. Then we will need to define the material to render our mesh. We define new 3 mesh basic material, and we can pass the color, different properties for this object. Once we have the geometry and the material, we can create our cube, our mesh cube. We create a new mesh. We pass it, the first parameter is the geometry, and the second one is the material. And finally, we need to add it into our scene. Now let's open our starter project, app.jsx, put it on the side, one to each other. We can remove the default example we have here. To do the exact same thing, we want to declare a mesh. We make it declaratively using React component. Inside our mesh, we have a geometry. It's a box geometry. It uses the camel case syntax. It means it's a Three.js component. So first a lowercase letter, and then for the subsequent object, you will have an uppercase letter. This is camel case. To pass the constructor argument, we use the prop args is equal to an array. And to know what are the definition of those arguments, we can highlight the prop, and with Visual Studio Code IntelliSense, we can see it's the width, the height, or the depth. So 1, 1, 1. But to understand what those parameters represent, you can open Three.js documentation, see box geometry, and you have the parameters here with the explanation and definition. Now we have our geometry. We can add a mesh basic material, and to set the default color here, we can say color is equal to 0x00ff00. We don't need here to do scene add cube because as we define it declaratively inside the canvas, it's automatically added to the scene. Now, if we look at our project, we have a green cube. So to know if a component is from Three.js or React Refiber library, you just have to look if it's camel case, so lowercase. This is from Three.js. And if you look at the canvas, it comes from React Refiber. It has an uppercase letter. To see more in depth how to declare objects using React Refiber, I recommend you to read the documentation. The link is in the lesson below. Now we know how to declare them using React Refiber. Let's understand what geometries, materials, and meshes are. The simplest way I found to explain to you what it is to use Blender. We have 3 cubes next to each other. Let's open the edit mode. And we have the vertex selection. So we are in the vertex mode. And a vertex, what it is points in a 3D space that define the shape of our object. So you have this point here, it's a vertex. Here, here, you see how our object is defined. If I move one point, the shape of our object change. The vertices, they are connected to each other using edges. And to define the surfaces of our object, there are the faces. So it's connecting 3 or more vertices. But when I move a face here, what is really happening is I'm moving each vertex independently. You can see that my vertex position change. If I undo, it's at another position here. The other property that have a geometry are the normal on a face. It's a vector that indicates how the light will reflect on that surface. And you also have UV coordinates. If I go to Material Preview, this one has a texture. We go to UV editing. You can see on the left the UV coordinate. It indicates how the texture is applied onto the object. We will see textures in a next lesson, but just understand that there are UV coordinates that define the position of the texture for that geometry. So far with the React Refiber, we used the simplest geometry, the box geometry, but there are other ones. For example, the sphere geometry. You can find the arguments in the documentation. You have the radius, the width segment, the height segment. Let's use it. Let's say 132, 32. And we'll replace the material with a normal material to see it better in 3D. So we can see we have a sphere on the screen. We also have the plane geometry. The arguments are the width and the height. So let's put 5 and 5. And we can see our plane facing our camera. Let's try a last one, the cylinder geometry. The arguments are the radius top, bottom, the height, and the radial segments. Let's use 1, 1, 2, and 32. We now have a cylinder in the middle of our screen. You can see all the different types into Three.js documentation. You can open any of them and play with the parameters directly in your browser. Now let's talk about materials. If geometry was the shape of the object, the material is like the cloth. It determines how our object surface will be rendered. There are many types of material that react to the light differently. Most of them have a color, or you can use a texture image to define the color more precisely. You can define if your object is more opaque or transparent, how it reflects light, or if it's completely raw. For example, if we take this box here, we are in material preview. It is yellow, so the color of this material is yellow. But we can play with some extra parameters. We will be able to do the same with the React Refiber. We can say it is metallic. So you can see the aspect is changing, and we can decrease the roughness to 0. So now it reflects a lot the light from the environment. Let's see the most common used material. We can see the mesh basic material that we used previously. We can say color is equal to green. Let's reuse a box geometry. If we look at it, it looks very flat. It is because mesh basic material doesn't react to lighting. So instead, we can use a mesh standard material. But now it is entirely black. This is because it reacts to lighting and we don't have lights into our scene. Let's add some lights. We will explain how it works in another lesson. But let's do an ambient light with an intensity of 0.5 and two directional lights. One on 0, 0, 3 with an intensity of 1, which is, I think, the default value. And another one at 3 and 3 with an intensity of 0.5. Let's also move the camera position here. And now we can see that our cube is really in 3 dimensions. Another type of material is the mesh tool material to create a nice cel shading effect. Let's use another geometry to visualize it better with the torus knot geometry. The arguments, we can use 1, 0.3, 200, and 32. Now it looks more cartoonish. There are a lot of other materials that you can see through Three.js documentation, and there are also other materials that come from Dry library. We will use some of them through the different projects of the next lessons. You can also create your own material using shader, but we won't cover this topic in this course. As a rule of thumb, when you need to decide what material should you use, choose the simplest one that gives you the render that you want. Because the more complex it is, the more it will require resources, which could cost you some performances. Let's talk about the side of the material. Let's display 2 boxes. We will create 2 meshes with a box geometry and a mesh standard material with a color of hot pink. Okay. We do another one here. Let's position one slightly on the left. Don't worry, we'll explain position in the next lesson. So minus 0.6 and here 0.6. Position Z minus 1. So far we have 2 boxes next to each other. There is one prop on our mesh standard material, which is the side. We need to import a Three.js, import star as 3 from 3 to import Three.js. Now we can use 3.frontside. So this is the side of the mesh we want to render. But for the second one, we want to render the back side. So what do we see? Here we render only the front side of our faces of our object. So it looks like a cube. But here we see the cube from its inside because we see only the back faces. So this is the one from the back, the one from the back, and the one from the bottom that we can see. We see the back of it. You can also use a 3 double side to render both the front and the back side of the face. Usually you will need it maybe on the plane if you want to see below the ground and over it. With Three.js, you can define the colors in many different ways. For example, here we use CSS color name. Before we were using 0x00, so you can use hexadecimal this way, but you can use it like CSS. For example, hashtag, and then use the hexadecimal value. There is no one good way to do it. It's like CSS, you have the choice. Use it like you want. You can look at the documentation in Three.js to see all the way you can define colors. Now what we have seen geometries and materials, we can talk about meshes. A mesh, it is the 3D object that contains the geometry to display the shape of the object, the material to define how your object is rendered, and the transformation information, for example, the position of your object in a 3D world, the rotation of it, and the scale of it. We will talk about transforms in the next lesson.